So now that we've drawn something here, though, if you think about it, when you're making a game, like I mentioned, you say you want to draw a figure on the screen, you don't want that figure to just randomly jump around. You want to save where most of it is. Let's say the guy is moving his hand. You still don't want the legs and head to disappear. So we're going to now move on to having we're going to try and draw a panel that looks like this, where we have rectangles that, as I redraw and repaint, notice how the previous rectangles stay on the screen. Okay, so this is what we're going to create now in 2 steps. All right, so our first thing that we're going to concentrate on is being able to draw rectangles. We'll just keep them green for now and have them just remain on the screen as I keep adding new ones. So how are we going to do that? Okay, so the main thing to remember is, from the notes, is that we want to maintain data. We want to maintain the state of the component in instance variables. Okay, so if we think about this, this has no memory. It just resets and like draws a new rectangle every time. It just kind of draws, some random XY rectangle, and that's not very helpful. And so what we want to do then is we need to have some kind of data structure. So we want to store the state in some instance variables. Right? It's often some kind of data structure, like an array or an array list. So now, how are we going to do that? Let's think about what do we need to draw those green squares. Actually, they are on the screen. Well, if you think about it, all we're really doing right now, the only thing that we need to save is this right here, right? X and Y. So for our first crack at it, let's just go ahead and save that X and Y. Now, the X and Y really belong together, and so we're not going to save them as X and Y separately, like in concurrent arrays or anything like that. Object-oriented programming says that since X and Y belong together, we should create a new class that groups X and Y. So let's think about what would we call that class that groups X and Y together. Well, that would just be some kind of point, right? Let's just call it point. Now, we could create a new class, but because this is such a small class, and we just learned about this in Chapter 5, we can actually create a small nested class. So let's create, again, we're storing the state of all those X and Y pairs. We want to group them together in our own class name. So again, let's call that point. Let's call that point. So let's create a private class. So again, for a nested class, you can almost just indent and just treat it almost like a variable, point. So private class point. What does a point have? It just has an X and a Y. So I could say private int X comma Y, or I could do them in 2 different lines. X comma Y. Now when I create a point, I still need a constructor. I think I could even leave this private. The reason being, since it's nested, these guys should still be able to access it. So private point int X int Y. No one else needs to access point outside this drawing panel class. So that's what I can do. And I can just say this dot x equals x, this dot y equals y. So we've created a class that groups together x and y because we think, you know what, that's the only information we need to save in order to recreate that drawing. Remember, drawing in Java is it's like animation, not claymation. You need to redraw everything from scratch, every single frame. So now that we've got this class, we can create a data structure to hold all these points, right? Like if you think about it, every time every time I redraw, every time the system calls paint component, I need to add another rectangle, right? Well, the previous rectangles need to be stored somewhere, right, in some kind of data structure. So for now, let's just keep it in an array. Okay, it's an array of points, right? It's a point array. Okay, we're going to use our new data structure, our new type that we've created called point. So let's have a point array called points. And since it's an array, we need to give it a size. So this is going to hold all the different points. So let's just make it really big, like 20,000. Okay, so now This is an empty array, but as we move, we're going to be filling it. We're going to be filling it with rectangles, and so we're going to need to keep track, because right now, initially, this is just an empty array, right? It's just full of null, 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 null. But what we want to do then is, as we are calling pin component over and over again, we want to add to this point array new x's and y's. So we already have that outline here. So let's say this is the first time we call pin component, right? So as it gets loaded. So I have this random x and y, and so then what I want to do is I want to draw using that guy. So let's think about this. I'm generating this random x and y, but instead of just drawing it directly, what I want to do then is I want to create a new point object and save it in the data structure, right? In the data structure. Why do I want to save it in the data structure? Because that way I can recreate it. I can recreate or redraw it every time I call pin component. I call pin components. Or sorry, not every time I call, every time the system calls. Component. Okay, so what do I mean by this? Well, let's think about this. Let me just bring this out here. All right, so let's say, so this is my points now, right? So system, when this guy is first created, there's 20,000. They're all just null, right? It's full of, because it's an object. But let's say this is the first time. The first time I want to then load, I want to create a point object. So I want to load it here. I want to load it in this one. So I need to have some kind of pointer that will say, hey, I'm going to put it in this first slot here. And then when I'm done with that one, so let's say I generate a random x and y. Let's say I generate a random x and y like, so this is a new point object. Let's say the x is like 52 and y is like 78. Okay, so I want this to point to there instead. And then I'm saving it in the array. That way I can redraw it next time I load it, right? So then the second time pin component is called when I resize it. This guy is still here. So at first I want to draw this, and then I want to store a new x and y, right? So I want to not have null here. I want to have a new point object, right, randomly 294, and then y is like, I don't know, 111, right? And then the third time, I don't want to delete these. They're saved. So I go through. I'm going to draw this, and then I want to create a new null with a new randomly new point object. X is whatever, and y is whatever. So you can see that having a data structure allows us to store the information, to redraw it every time we call paint component. So we can see also that we need some kind of pointer to keep track of where we're at in the array, right? Because we don't have these. We don't want to draw this. This would give us a null pointer. So we need some kind of counter to keep track of how many of these points we have. And then of course we already have our data structure, but I'm just pointing out how we're about to use it. The good thing is we already have that, and it's counter, right? So if you want, you could change counter to be a little more descriptive, like number of rectangles or number of points, right? Because they stand for rectangles, but you can call it number of points or whatever. I'll call it number of rectangles, okay? And so what we want to do then, I guess I'll move this down here. Let's do the drawing of the font first. So I create this x and y. And then again, I want to save it. I want to store it. So I want to create a new, points. So first time is going to get stored in the 0, right? So that would be here, right? I'm storing it here in the 0th one. So I want to create a new object and put it in the 0th one. So So that would be num of rectangles, right? Because initially that's 0. I want to point that to a new point object. And what are those x and y's? That's this randomly generated one right here. Okay. And then I want to iterate, so plus plus. By the way, you can also go like this and do that in one step if you want, but that might be kind of confusing. Remember, this is postfix, so it'll do it and then increment. But just to keep it understandable, I'll do it in 2 steps. Okay, so we create a new point. Now, let's think about what this does. So the first time, this is 0, so it adds a new point object and it goes through here. But then the beautiful thing is the second time, which will be coming up fast, is that this will be incremented now to 1, right? Number of points is now 1, so it won't overwrite here, it'll add it here. Then the third time it's called, this will be incremented to 2 now, and then it'll store it here. So the net effect is that we're going to get this stored properly. Okay, so if we go, everything is stored correctly. Let's go ahead and run it. Oops, sorry, this counter thing is off. It shouldn't be counter, it should be num of rectangles now. If we run it, oops, sorry, that's the wrong one. That's the end goal one. If we run it, still doesn't work. See if you can understand what is wrong. Why isn't it redrawing? Everything is being saved. Everything is being saved properly. Our data structure is stored. Everything is as it should be here. Why isn't it working correctly? You can pause the video and see if you can fix it. Okay, so hopefully as you're thinking about it, you realize that, okay, we've created a new point object, saved it in our data structure. I should go ahead and put that right here. That way I can recreate it every time the system calls paint component, so I've done that. The problem is, this is our drawing, right? It doesn't matter what our state is correct, but we're not drawing it correctly. We need to have some kind of loop. We need to actually go through and redraw all the rectangles from scratch, right? That's what you have to do. Remember, this is animation, not claymation. Okay, so we need to have some kind of loop. Right now, we're just drawing the one that we most currently generated. All the other ones are there in the data structure. They're being saved, but we're not properly using it. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's draw some kind of for loop. Okay, so see if you can draw and pause the video. See if you can write some kind of for loop that will go through and properly draw everything. Okay, so hopefully you did some kind of for loop. If not, if you didn't get it, so some kind of loop that goes, all right, from 0 to, I don't want to do, for example, if I did points dot length, I'm going to have an issue here. So if I do points dot length, I'll have an issue because a bunch of these points are null. Okay, so we'll address that in a second. But the main thing is I want to do this same idea here. So I'm going to paste this. But instead of just the current one, I want to get points. Remember, this is an array of points, right? It's an array of points, so each one has an x and a y. I know it's private, but because it's nested, though, we can access it directly, so we don't need getters and setters. So we can say points index I dot x, points index I dot y. Just copy and paste that. Okay, so what is this? What is going on? We're just saying, hey, do a for loop. I'm going to loop through, okay? And for each one, I don't want to draw the current x and y. I want to draw this one's x and y, and then move on, draw this one and this one. Okay, and hopefully you can see that I don't want to stop at this length because I'm going to get the null pointers. I want to stop here as long as it's less than the number of rectangles, or whatever your counter is called. So this needs to change to number of rectangles. Okay, and now let's try to draw it. So there we go. We can see that it's saving at each tick of the at each step, each repaint or paint component call. I'm drawing all the ones that were stored in there, including the new one. Right? I'm not just drawing the newest one. And so every time I resize, it's going to do that call, and it's going to redraw them. Okay, so pretty cool. So that was a big step forward. We saved the state in a data structure, and we went through and we redrew all the rectangles from scratch using the state stored in our data structure. Right? That's a big idea, big concept. Okay, so last thing is we want to change it just a little bit. And this is just to practice a little bit more, is to change it so instead of having just green squares, that we get rectangles of different sizes and colors. Same idea, though. We want to save the state and have them be able to redraw themselves. And so this is going to cause us just to change a few things here. So looking at this, we're going to have to adjust what we need to save. What we need to save in our instance variables. So if you think about it, before we just need to save the x and y. Looking at this though, what other stuff do you think we would have to save in our instance variables? You know, we've got this x and y here, this x and y, this x and y, this x and y, this x and y. However, look, now it's not just, we can't just assume it's 100, 100. We're gonna have to save the width and the height of each rectangle as well as the color, okay? So instead of x and y, we're going to have to save the width, the height, and the color. And so with that, it's having it be a point is probably not a good idea anymore. So why don't we change the class name to be rectangle? Okay, so let's have a rectangle have x and a y and a width and a height, and it'll also have a color. Right, not just green, private color. Okay, and that should be in the java.auth. Yeah, okay, so we're good. All right, and so let's give the constructor the ability. So whenever I create a new rectangle object, I want to pass in the x, the y, the width, the height, and the color. Okay, and so we can say allow that to be set up that way. All right, so now let's just see how that changes. So instead of a point array, I will now have a rectangle array, and let's call it rectangles. By the way, just to illustrate what happens when we run out, let's just make it only 20, so you can see what happens when you fill up that array. Okay, so I'm going to draw the font. I'm going to draw this string here. Let's just do a little bit of extra practice. See if you can go ahead and draw a pink border like this, that no matter how much I resize it, notice how that pink border is there? See if you can do that as well. Go ahead and pause the video. See if you can draw a pink border. How would that look like? Go ahead and pause and try. Okay, so hopefully you did it inside paint component. All of your drawings should be in paint component. So I will have to change the graphics context, the color, to be color.pink. And then I'm going to draw a rect, g.drawRect. And what is my initial x and y? It's going to be 0, 0 for this component. 0, 0. Now, what is the width going to be? Remember, I am inside this drawing panel, which is itself a J panel. Remember, a J panel is a component. Every component has a special method called getWidth. So I could say getWidth, which would be like, 300. If it was 300, if I resize, it'd be like 350 or 375. I could say this.getWidth. That kind of helps remind you that, yeah, this is a J panel. And then getHeight. Okay, so I'm going to base off of that. Now, actually, remember, because the drawRect goes over by 1 pixel to the right and over by 1 pixel down, on most systems, I should say, we should add this -1 here to make it come back so it doesn't go over the edge. On my Mac, for some reason, it's okay even without this, but you could try it both ways, I guess. But that would give you that pink border. Okay, so let's keep going and changing here. So we're not having a rectangle point array. It's called rectangles. And let's go ahead and create a new rectangle object. X and Y, and we can have a new get width and height. So I'm just going to create a random width, oops, and height. Now we can make this, I don't know, like anything from, let's do from 0 to 200. And actually though, let's offset a little bit. So let's make it so it can't be like 0. So I'm just going to add like a plus 20 here. So at the very least it's going to be 20, and maybe it'll be like 219 or something like that. Okay, so we have some kind of randomness here. And then color. So we want, oops, height. We want color to be something random. And so we don't have a method for that. Let's just go ahead and create our own method down at the bottom here. Oops. So this will be outside of paint component. Outside of paint components. I have to go down and delete this space here. So outside of paint component. So outside of this, I'm going to create a, let's go ahead and create a static method. And it's going to just return a random color. Get random color. And remember, color can be done with HSB, hue, saturation, brightness. I think it's a little bit more common just to do RGB. So it's from 0 to 255. So again, math.random. Let's get a random thing from 0 to 255. So we're going to multiply by 256. Remember, that's a double though. We want to chop it down to an int or an INT. Okay, and that will be our red value, and then we'll get our blue, RGB, our green, and our blue. And so we're going to return a new color object created from that RGB value, red, green, blue. Okay, and that will return this random color. Okay, so now we can go and just make this static call, so we don't have to do this or anything like that. Just call get random color. And so now, if we think about it, our data structure is going to be a little bit different looking, but it's the same idea. So every pass through here, instead of this point array, right, we're going to have a rectangle array. Right? It's going to be a rectangle array. Rectangle array called rectangles. Same idea holds, but with every pass through, we're creating a new rectangle object. So it's a rectangle object with our x is like whatever, our y is whatever. We have a width now of like 120. It's going to be random height is 17, and now we've added a random color. It's going to be like, red is like, 50. 20, green is 25, and blue is 111, or whatever, some random color. And again, we're going to fill up. So first time pass, we're only going to draw this one. Second time, we're only going to draw the second one, whatever it is. Third time through, we're going to draw that one. Fourth time through, we're adding that one. But every time, we're going to do a for loop and draw them all, so that we, to the user, it looks like you're just adding that one little thing. Okay, so same idea. We want to just loop through the number of rectangles, so there's no null pointer. And we're going to, so now this is a little bit different. We have a little conundrum here. I could draw this, but conceptually, there's a kind of a better way to do it. So first off, yes, I could set the color to be whatever rectangle's eye color is. I could fill it. I could draw, I could do it just like this. Just add the color and the size and things like that. But another way to do it, and slightly more object-oriented, is to change the rectangle class itself. Okay, so I'm going to cut this, and well, copy it, I guess, if you want. And I want to go back to my rectangle class. So object-oriented programming should say that, all right, instead of doing all that drawing down there, have the rectangle be able to draw itself. Okay, so we can have this method actually be private, and it is going to be draw, and it can take in a graphics G. Now I said all the drawing has to be within paint component, but if you pass in this G from the paint component call, that's okay. So you can do this. So you're passing in your graphics context, and now since we're inside the rectangle class, we're just defining for every rectangle, this is what you do to draw it. So I would say, all right, set color not to be green, but set color to whatever my color is. Whatever my color is, I'm going to set that color. And then I'm going to fill a rect. And I don't need to do this here. I can just say, all right, so whatever my x is, whatever my y is, and my width is going to be whatever my width is, and my height is going to be whatever my height is. Okay, so I'm going to set it to be like whatever, magenta or whatever randomly it was, and then I'm going to fill it with whatever my x, y, width, and height are. Remember, this is all saved with each construction. Remember, this was all saved whenever I constructed this object. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the draw rect. So in other words, we moved the drawing to the rectangle class itself. Conceptually, this makes more sense, so that kind of object-oriented style. So now if you think about it, what would you do? See if you can pause the video. What would you do here instead of doing that whole g.setColor? How did that, what we just did, make things easier? So pause the video, see if you can fill it in. Okay, so the beautiful thing is, instead of having to do that whole, drawing step-by-step, setting the colors, so on and so forth, I could just say, all right, go down the line and call draw for this rectangle, this rectangle, this rectangle. Every one of these guys knows how to draw themselves. So just go down for however many rectangles we have and call draw. So rectangles, I.draw. Pass in the G, and we're done. All right, so we've done that. Let's go ahead and run our main method here. So there we go. We've got our pink border that works. I've got my message here. I've got this guy. Now let's see if I resize it. Does it save the state? It did. All right, so we've got a rectangle array filled with x's and y's, widths and heights, colors. It was all saved, and in fact we did it in a good object-oriented way. Each rectangle knows how to draw itself. So with each frame, I'm going back and redrawing all the different rectangles, and I think this is a good stopping point for 6-2.